Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steve. My name is Brad Galliette. I am secretary for the Yale class of 2008, and also a member of the SOM class of 2011, and a member of the Yale Board of Governors. And welcome to tonight's event, which is sponsored by YAA and part of our Careers Life and Yale Thursday event series. And stay tuned, by the way, for events like this that we do on an ongoing basis every Thursday around 8 p.m. And a quick reminder as well for those of you who might not already be a member to please join Cross Campus, which is the social network for Yale alumni at crosscampus.yale.edu. And we're very pleased tonight to introduce David Light, who is a fellow member of the Yale College class of 2008, and also a co-founder of Valisure. Now, David studied molecular biology, and after graduation, he worked in a variety of scientific and business roles in the biotech space in Connecticut startups, such as Synthetic Genomics and also Ion Torrent. In 2015, he reconnected with Yale friend Adam Clark-Joseph of the class of 2007 and co-founded Valisure. Now, Valisure is an online pharmacy that is attached to an analytical laboratory where all medications are chemically validated before being dispensed to consumers. And since its founding at Yale Science Park, Valisure's core mission has always been to independently check the chemical makeup of medications before they reach consumers and deliver the transparency and quality assurance that patients, doctors, and the broader healthcare system have come to expect. Now, stemming from this work, Valisure has been responsible for nationwide recalls of medications prescribed tens of millions of times every year, and Valisure has come to be recognized as an authority about the safety of the US pharmaceutical supply. More recently, in fact, just within the past week, Valisure announced its findings about carcinogens found in multiple hand sanitizer brands. In June of last year, in fact, David testified to the US Senate Finance Committee about the FDA's drug manufacturing and inspection process, and he is also frequently sought by other outlets as an expert in similar topics, regularly quoted in publications such as Bloomberg, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and CBS Evening News, among others. And we're very pleased to welcome him here tonight as a speaker for tonight's Careers Life and Yale event. So with that, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Brad. I have very little to add to all of that. Excellent background on Valisure and what we've been doing here, and really appreciate the opportunity to come to speak before this group. I do have some slides to go through, so I guess I'll just share my screen and we'll take it from there.
That sounds great. Please do.
All righty. And you should see my screen now, and just putting it into.
Yep, we see it well.
Presenter mode. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, I'm happy to be as informal as you'd like. Feel free to stop me at any point. Happy to take questions, or we can just delve into more questions at the end. I think there'll be plenty of time. So I figured today to give a little bit of background on Valisure and also its founding story, as you mentioned, Adam and myself, and then perhaps go into some of these specific drug quality issues, a few of these case studies that I think really underscore what we do and why we do, and you know, the impact of doing it, and then kind of get a little bit deeper into the pharmaceutical supply chain, and at least from our perspective, the really high importance of independent testing. And actually, I know that Yale is launching a private regulation initiative where they're delving into how this is being done more and more in industry in a variety of different areas. And we work more and more with the Yale Public Health Regulatory Affairs folks, and we're very excited to be part of the whole Yale community, and continuing to integrate there. So that's what I'll talk about today. And to start off with our founding, as Brad gave a very nice background on, a good friend of mine from Yale, Adam Clark-Joseph, we were not just friends, we were also part of the same fraternity, Beta Theta Pi, while we were at Yale, which has some interesting history and background itself that we don't need to get into necessarily, or at least that seems like a separate talk. But bottom line is we've stayed close friends for ever since we got out of college. And really, one point in 2015, Adam was telling me about all these issues he was having with his own anticonvulsant medications. Effectively, every once in a while, he'd refill his meds and he'd just feel terrible that month. He get all these side effects and relapses sometimes. And he's got great doctors, I'm sure, and he's talked to them, and the doctors are telling him, listen, there's variability in medications. Everything's made in India and China these days, and there's just not a whole lot we can do about it as doctors or as pharmacists. It just is what it is. Obviously, Adam didn't like that answer, and came to me, a technology development buddy, and I'd been spending most of my time in the genetics space. Another Connecticut startup called Ion Torrent, founded by Jonathan Rothberg, also a Yale alumni, where we kind of had this idea to sequence DNA in a microchip, and took it from idea to what is now the #2 technology in the world. So anyway, that was my background, really much more from the biotech tools industry, biotechnology development. And we started putting our heads together on this problem. I was obviously sad to hear about the issues that Adam himself personally was having, and wanted to understand more about, is this a one-off issue, or is this something more serious that we should actually do something about? And you don't have to peel that many layers back from the onion to realize that drug quality issues are actually quite serious, and not just somewhere else on the planet, but right here in the United States. I actually realized looking at it that this is an old slide, partially thanks to Valisure work. There are now about 4 drug recalls a day, not 3, on average. And there's a lot of talk about how expensive medications are, or the latest and greatest cancer therapies, and those are really exciting technological innovations, but they're a tiny percentage of what an average person actually takes. The vast majority of the billions of bottles of prescription medication that Americans use every year are generic drugs that have been around for decades, and I've heard it from multiple people in the industry, are concerningly cheap. They're a penny or so a pill, and to get prices that low, which by the way has almost nothing to do with the prices you pay. The manufacturing prices are tiny fractions of what you're paying out of your own wallet or what your insurance company is paying, which is again another separate talk. But the point is that the vast majority of what people are taking are made overseas, or part of a giant supply chain. And honestly, just because some of it might be made in the United States or in Europe doesn't mean that they're immune to quality issues either. And we'll talk about some of that. But there are really serious issues. And I remember early on, looking with Adam, and we were looking into the academic literature, and especially in things like anti-epileptic medication, there's a tremendous amount of studies out there looking at the problems between brand and generic. And something like anti-epileptics, it's very clear when there's a problem because they get a seizure. But obviously the same issues happen in all sorts of different medications. So we looked deeper into it, and again, it doesn't take a whole lot more to see that there's a growing engagement from the whole medical community. I mean, the American Medical Association has been talking about fear and mistrust being 2 of the 8 top reasons for medication non-adherence. There was a highly impactful book that was a New York Times bestseller in 2019 called Bottle of Lies, that goes into a deep study of generic drug fraud. There's companies like Ranbaxy that were huge companies with over 100 drug products in the United States that didn't test any of them. They were just the entire company was built on fraud. And I think it just really underscores the leaky nature of our regulatory system. There's a lot that can be done to improve it, but we're not going to wait around to just have action. We're taking action ourselves. And really what we came up with as a high level concept is that we need independently certified drug products. We need an independent layer of analysis, independent of the existing system, and not to say that automatically every manufacturer out there is doing the wrong thing or is producing poor quality products, but obviously those products are out there, and obviously there are real problems, and there's a really important point of we have to have an independent layer of analysis and of certification, which exists for practically every other consumer product. You wouldn't buy a used car without getting a Carfax report or seeing what JD Power and Associates say about it. You don't buy anything on Amazon without looking at ratings, and all these kinds of things exist for practically everything. Food, everybody's looking for the organic badge, or there's these things have existed for literally everything else you put in your body or buy as a consumer, except in the drug industry. And so it was actually, once we launched Valisure, that it was doctors that taught us that we had essentially created this new category of medication that hasn't existed before, which is especially prominent in generics on the concept of having a certified generic. So that's really what Valisure was all about, and the kind of the high level of what Valisure is we have our own laboratory that's at Yale Science Park. Adam and I spent the first few years of Valisure just kind of tinkering on the technology side and developing core analytical tools to allow us to do a high throughput, low cost analysis of drug products, but that would still be very high accuracy and precision. And that really took us all the way into 2018-19. And 2019, we did a big, over 2,000 drug product launch, full launch of our online pharmacy that is attached to the laboratory. So, we get drug products from the pharmaceutical supply chain, just like any pharmacy or wholesaler or retailer would in the drug space. The only difference is that we put them through our laboratory first. So it gets analyzed first at the batch level. We take samples out of the batch, we analyze them. If they pass the tests, then we pass them on to our online pharmacy that then dispenses those drugs direct to patients and come with a certificate of analysis, very much like you're used to getting nutritional information on your food. There's obviously nothing for your meds other than it comes in an orange bottle and might have a number printed on it. So that was really the core concept of the pharmacy that we launched. And the purpose of launching the pharmacy was really twofold. One, as a proof of principle that it can actually be done for thousands of drug products. In this pharmacy, we had over 2,000 drug products, have over 2,000 drug products. It was, really an operational challenge to some degree to make sure that everything can go through our laboratory and then pharmacy in a timely fashion. And we can keep track of all the lots and batches and everything else, but we did it, and we got tremendous engagement from patients and doctors and so on and so forth. But the other purpose of doing it was it allowed us to actually take an independent snapshot of quality of what's really going on in the pharmaceutical supply chain, something that nobody else has ever done, and prove the importance of independent testing, of quality assurance for medications. And we'll talk about some of what happened from all of that, and I think a lot of impact in a very short period of time. I think underscores the reality that we're just starting to scratch the surface, and there's a lot of quality problems out there. But it also is enabling us to take Valisure to the next level, which is not just through an online pharmacy that can access a certain number of patients. We're licensed in 38 states now, and will eventually be in 50. But there's a lot of problems in the pharmacy world related to insurance carrying and pharmacy benefit managers. And again, that's a whole separate talk, but there are layers of problems in the American healthcare system that astound me every time that I learn more about it. But the point is that we're now really expanding into taking this same core value of independently certified drugs and drugs that come with a certificate of analysis into wholesale and all the way into wholesale partners that are not just ourselves, and working all the way up with labelers and manufacturers, and not too far down the road, even taking all the data that we generate and starting to have guidance data a rational approach for buyers and purchasers of drugs, anywhere from large health systems like Yale to the Department of Defense to all sorts of players in between. So I think it's really poised to have this kind of tremendous big funnel impact. And we're already scaling it at the very least into the wholesale and supply chain side, labelers and manufacturers. And I'm going to give some examples of that here. Earlier last year, we started wholesaling directly to clinics that have their own pharmacies that could then dispense to their own patients Valisure certified products. And they often put it up as a value to their own patients of why to come to their clinic. And we also started programs now with manufacturers and labelers of drug products that can work with us to independently certify their products before it leaves their own manufacturing facilities. Not only to catch problems, we've actually had a few scenarios where we've caught something that they didn't actually see themselves, and we prevented from going on the market, and not just protecting patients and consumers, but also making it easier for the manufacturer. They didn't have to do some big public recall. We caught it before it was on the market. But point is, it also is a differentiator for their products, and especially in the generic drug industry, there is no quality differentiation. And I think what Valisure is starting is definitely going to be impactful for them. And we did publish a paper, including with some folks from Yale Regulatory Affairs last year, about the concept of boiling down all the data that we create and boiling it into just simple drug quality scores. Can even be as simple as a red, yellow, green, that can help inform purchasers, payers of incentivizing green, and don't buy reds. And at a healthcare system level, that could be very impactful, and that's going to take some time to fully operationalize, but could be really interesting from a data perspective. So to give some case studies, there's one in particular in terms of a contamination. And I know Brad already gave away some of the latest and breaking news going on this week that we'll get to as well, at least at a high level. But one of the issues that started in 2018, so also pretty recent issue in terms of drug quality, is around this compound called NDMA. It stands for nitrosodimethylamine, and it's caused a lot of the fairly famous drug recalls in the last couple of years. And is worth a little bit of background, because one of the things that I've really been annoyed about as a scientist and as a consumer of drug products, obviously, is that it was kind of talked about broadly as if the whole industry was surprised. Oh my God, there's NDMA. No, how would we have even ever known that this could be a possibility? And thank God we have all this amazing technology in the 21st century to be able to detect it, and that's why we're looking at it now. That's just completely false and untrue in every possible way. NDMA is actually one of the most studied carcinogens on the planet. It was originally identified in the 1950s. It's been heavily studied in the 60s and 70s. There was United States Senate hearings in the exact same building that I testified last year. There was testimony specifically on NDMA in drug products in 1977. They were talking about dimethylnitrosamines as one of the most potent carcinogens known, inducing liver cancer in rats. That's a direct quote from the United States Senate hearing in 1977. There were World Health Organization and United Nations summits of global scientists in 1978 to discuss the problem of nitrosamines and dimethylnitrosamine specifically. So there's really no excuse. This was not a surprise to the industry, certainly in my view or in the view of academic scientists. And on the technology side, I just wanted to underscore one of the many papers. This is a paper from 1970 that described a system for the analysis of using a gas liquid chromatography, which is exactly what we use today, for the analysis of dimethylnitrosamine down to picogram levels. And what we're talking about from the regulatory perspective is nanogram, which is 1,000 times more abundant. So it's just nonsense. This technology has been around for many decades and was very much an industry-wide awareness that this is a compound that could be a huge problem. So with that background, we can actually go into what started all this, which was in the modern era of drug quality, and a drug called valsartan. So valsartan is an angiotensin receptor blocker drug for blood pressure. I have the molecule up here, and we're not going to get into a serious organic chemistry discussion, but at a high level, the compound of NDMA, nitrosodimethylamine, is here. And I'm highlighting the two main pieces of it. And again, very kind of high level chemistry here is that it's comprised of a nitroso group here in blue and a dimethylamine here in red. And these two pieces don't exist on valsartan by itself. But what was later found is that this solvent called dimethylformamide was the cause of where NDMA was coming from. And there's a side reaction that was essentially reacting with this that formed the NDMA as it also reacted with other nitrogen sources. And this is what happened. This is why the medication got contaminated and recalled all over the world. So one of the very first studies that Valisure did was saying, okay, we understand that this has happened, and interesting that it got related to dimethylformamide, but dimethylformamide itself is also a group 2A carcinogen. Group 2A meaning a probable human carcinogen. It's the same category as NDMA. And also to be clear about these categories, the highest category is a group 1, which is a known human carcinogen. Things like asbestos. But the only reason that we know for sure that asbestos is a human carcinogen and that nitrosodimethylamine is still an open question is that there hasn't been enough people directly exposed to have a robust epidemiological study to directly connect the two. So many people were exposed to asbestos that it became obvious that it was related to cancer in humans, and therefore it gets put into group 1. But group 2A is still extremely serious because it was very clearly shown in animals that it causes cancer. And obviously, you cannot have a study where you take a bunch of people, give them a carcinogen, and see what kind of cancer they develop. So it remains a group 2A. So it's a very serious grouping. And so we looked for this compound, dimethylformamide. And turns out we found it in about 2/3 of the drug products of valsartan on the market in the United States, some of which at extremely high level, hundreds of thousands of nanograms. And so we put together.
Can I ask a quick one? Are you typically finding those in generics, or you find them in brand names as well?
I'm glad you asked that question, and it's going to be addressed here very shortly, and I think in a very interesting way. And short answer is, in this particular case, was also found in the brand Diovan made by Novartis. So I actually already gave the background on the group 2A and what that means. And it was an interesting case, specifically with dimethylformamide, because it was reclassified by the World Health Organization and the International Agency in the Research of Cancer as group 2A in 2018. However, the last time the FDA had any guidance on DMF was 2017. And so what we did is we put together what's called an FDA citizen petition. So we were new to this at that time, and we thought it was an appropriate document to put together to really bring this to the FDA's attention and hopefully get them to act. And turns out it also got a lot of media attention and ended up being a very effective mechanism to not only bring something to the FDA's attention, which, by the way, they still have not responded to that, and it's been almost 2 years. So it doesn't always get FDA action, but at the very least, it was a mechanism to get a lot of attention for a real scientific problem that has a regulatory basis. And so now going to another interesting drug product and another FDA citizen petition that we filed called ranitidine. So ranitidine, many people would know by the brand name Zantac. So there's another point to address the question about brand versus generic. And what's very interesting on the chemistry side for ranitidine is that now if you look at NDMA and you look at ranitidine, even by eye, very clear that these structures are the same. It has a dimethylamine group right on the molecule itself. And interestingly enough, on ranitidine, it also has a nitroso. It's nitrite, but it's easily formed into a nitroso group right there on the molecule. It doesn't take a PhD level chemist to realize that these two pieces could react with each other. And that's essentially was the crux of our petition, is that not only were we detecting NDMA in this drug product, not just the blood pressure medications that we were talking about, that the whole regulatory framework had been focusing on, but in ranitidine, in Zantac, in every single drug product, whether brand or generic, seemed to have this inherent problem that was due to the molecule itself, not just a contamination from manufacturing. And so we informed the FDA of this back in June of 2019. By September 13th of that year, the FDA surprised us with this announcement that they identified a low-level NDMA quote-unquote contamination in this product, which was certainly not what our concern was. Our concern was that this is a fundamentally unstable molecule. And at the time, we were also working with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center to complete a study on the epidemiology, in addition to all of the chemistry and molecular biology work that we'd put into this. So as soon as we saw they made that statement, we filed what we had in terms of our data in another FDA citizen petition that very clearly pointed out that this does not at all appear to be a contamination issue, but a fundamental problem with the drug itself that appears to be reacting with itself to form NDMA, not just in manufacturing or transportation and storage, but very likely in the human body, where its instability is even a bigger problem as it enters your stomach or could be acted on by the thousands of enzymes throughout the human body. So Canada paid quite close attention to our petition. They announced a countrywide ban on ranitidine only 4 days later. And over 40 countries followed. There's a great Bloomberg article about that's linked here. If this presentation is available later, there's some active links in it. And then finally, almost 8 months later, the FDA agreed with us, many months behind the rest of the world, that the FDA, that ranitidine should not be on the market, and took it off. And it's really, I think, a very interesting case study that there's plenty more information on, much more time than we have today. Ranitidine used to be the #1 drug in the world, and it's been on the market for almost 40 years. And there's over 500 academic papers written about the problems of ranitidine and the formation of NDMA, and yet none of it had an impact until we did an FDA citizen petition and brought it to light with the media and everything else. And it's unfortunately a very eye-opening case study of the unfortunate disconnect of the manufacturing and the regulatory world from the academic and the scientific one at times, obviously not all the time, but it is a very concerning case study. And to push us forward even another few months, there's metformin. So metformin is another also overall interesting case study. Metformin is a diabetes drug. It's the #4 most prescribed drug in the United States. It's the top medication for diabetes. And if you look at this structure, what you see is you actually have half of the NDMA molecule on it, but no nitrogen source. And so what we did is we investigated metformin. There's a whole long backstory. The FDA investigated too and actually found no problems. We investigated it, found about 40% of the metformin drug products in the United States market were contaminated with NDMA. We filed a citizen petition, and a few months later, there finally were recalls, and there's still recalls to this day ongoing. But what's interesting from a case study perspective about this is that the quality problem, unlike Zantac, which is due to the drug itself, here it seems very clear to be a manufacturing issue, because the failures and the passing batches are really all over the place. And we even did a crowdsourcing study where we had hundreds of submissions from individuals all over the United States that sent us products of their own metformin. And on the right is all the various batches that we analyzed that passed, and on the left is all the various batches that failed, according to the various manufacturer or labelers. And you have some companies that fail sometimes and pass other times. You have some companies that seem to pass almost all the time and then fail sometimes. And then you have some companies that fail every time. And it's just all over the map. and is likely a scenario of underscoring just how amazingly complicated the drug supply chain is. This is just a little schematic, which is in itself actually quite a summary of the drug supply chain, of where all the pieces come from before you actually get it, which is the very end of this entire diagram. The case of metformin might actually be a problem all the way at the beginning of the supply chain, where you have the raw materials that are used to make the active pharmaceutical ingredient that goes into the drug. Since it's really a piece of it is already on the drug, so it would even be the formative pieces that make the drug that could have been contaminated. Obviously, we don't know, and it'll probably be a lot more studies that need to come out to really understand exactly where this contamination came from. But to take us up to today, as of yesterday, we filed what is now our fourth FDA citizen petition on a new contamination. So we did our first one on dimethylformamide. We did a couple more on nitrosamine. And in this case, we're talking about benzene. So benzene, although NDMA is arguably one of the most studied and known carcinogens, benzene is, I would guess, probably the most. It's been the first studies that showed it being toxic to humans were in 1897, before we even knew what cancer was, and has been one of the most well correlated compounds to specifically blood cancers and leukemia. This is a group 1 known human carcinogen, the highest possible category, due to systemic exposure of fuel workers, mostly oil workers, where benzene largely comes from. It's a distillate from the petroleum industry, or at least that's where it is in high volumes, and is an extremely dangerous compound. It can be carcinogenic through epidemiological studies, which need to look at a lot of the data, to at least 0.8 parts per million. So really at very small trace amounts can have a significant effect. And we found it in hand sanitizers, in about 17% of the hand sanitizers on the United States market. We just filed a petition to get that addressed. The FDA has not made any comments, at least to us. They've started making some comments to some of the press, and hopefully we get some action done on that. And by the way, certainly something that affects a lot of us today. You can go to valisure.com. At the top of the page, we have a lot more information about it. You can read the whole petition. We're also doing another crowdsourcing study. If you want to send us some hand sanitizer for analysis, we're happy to do that. We have a no-cost program where we're doing that at no cost to people to send it in. And we're starting to actually work with manufacturers and labelers and wholesalers that have their own products that are certified. So there's even a listing of the products that we're currently certifying that people can acquire, that we know that we're testing every single batch, and do not have these kinds of contaminations. So just the latest example. And one of the things that I wanted to come across in a talk like this, where we have a little bit more time, is that the carcinogenic contamination is certainly something that gets a lot of press, and I think rightfully so, is certainly very concerning. But there are many facets and angles to the issues of drug quality and inconsistencies and overall quality concerns. There's been increasing studies, even in the literature, about the quote unquote inactive ingredients that are used to formulate drugs. And here we have an image of lisinopril, the number 2 most prescribed drug in the United States, where you're looking at 6 different pills that ostensibly have the same drug in it, but obviously are made differently. And that was a great quote from that paper that I talked about earlier in the talk, that the premise that every innovator generic product is of equal quality is just demonstrably false. So there obviously is variability, and all sorts of layers of quality problems. So some of these studies that have come out that are particularly concerned about the inactive ingredients themselves not being entirely inert, and something that Bloomberg News has been on top of for quite some time, about the differences in formulation. There's a lot of doctors that have been concerned about this for decades. In that book, Bottle of Lies, they go into hospitals like the Cleveland Clinic that even have a blacklist of certain manufacturers they don't buy from, which kind of proves the point there. If they're all exactly the same, they're all FDA approved, why would they not buy from some manufacturers as opposed to others? Because obviously there's differences. And here's an interesting anecdote. We did a white paper on this that's on our website, where we looked at dissolution. We actually found a batch of ibuprofen that when we tested it in our dissolution systems wouldn't dissolve for over 24 hours. And so, you know, the active ingredient actually is in the proper amount, about 200 milligrams in these tablets, but you're most likely going to be pooping them out before you actually got the therapeutic benefit of what's supposed to be in those pills. So there's really a whole variety of different angles and facets to the quality problem, not just contamination, and we do investigate a lot of these. So to bring it back to the kind of the root cause and you know, every individual case study and quality problem can obviously have a whole a different angle in terms of its root cause and why these things are happening. But I think a lot of it boils back down to the fact that this is an amazingly complicated supply chain. It's a $2 trillion global system. That's just very difficult to be on top of all pieces of it. And, you know, the FDA as a regulatory system obviously does as much as it can, but I think there's a lot of misconception of what the FDA even does. You know, they're not out there testing products. Their job is to make sure that the manufacturers are doing the process properly by looking at their paperwork, which the manufacturers self-report to the FDA, and the FDA inspects every few years or so. And even then, by the way, the inspections that the FDA does when it's an overseas facility are announced a few months ahead of time. And even then, in some countries like India, they fail about 1 out of 5 inspections. So obviously big regulatory gaps and a lot of ways in which this giant supply chain could have problems that seep into it. And, you know, like I said, in terms of root cause, you know, the metformin scenario might go all the way back to the inputs. The valsartan scenario was specifically pinned back to the active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturers and their solvent recyclers, which is not even on here because this is a simplification. And to the question before about brand versus generic, the interesting part bringing up in this slide is, again, the DMF scenario, which I bring up because it was so interesting what Novartis had to say about it. So when we came out with this petition, and one of the drug products that also had dimethylformamide was the Novartis Diovan brand. What Novartis said, not to us, but to Bloomberg, was that from Novartis's perspective, they recognize the danger of dimethylformamide and they don't use it. They don't even allow their suppliers to use dimethylformamide. However, the suppliers of their suppliers may have used it and within certain limits may have gotten through all the way down to their final branded product, which I thought was a very reasonable and astute response from Novartis and really underscores how complicated the supply chain is, where you have an entity that is ostensibly trying to do as much as they can to prevent a potentially carcinogenic substance that's not even regulated yet, but is, you know, something that they're being proactive about. And then even in that scenario, there's only so much that they can do, thanks to how incredibly complex this system is. And to offer a quick analogy, you know, when you think about drugs and the bottle that you're getting from a pharmacy, that bottle or those tablets have often passed through many different hands, have traveled thousands of miles all over the world, and are actually often a few years old by the time that you're getting them. And one of the best correlators to that is a used car. Like, essentially, you're getting a used car when you're picking up that bottle. And you wouldn't buy a used car without, you know, a 100-point inspection on it, or getting something other than the manufacturer said that it was good when it was originally manufactured. But that's not something that traditionally exists for medications. And that's really what boils down to the critical importance of independent testing. This is what we were invited a few months ago to testify before the U.S. Senate Finance Committee. We were invited by Senator Grassley and his staff. Obviously, a big honor for us, a new company in this whole field, and you know, a startup to be, it's such an important place, and literally testifying in the same building that was talking about nitrosamines, over 40 years ago. But it's becoming, a growing concern throughout the entire supply chain and through, the government, regulatory, Department of Defense, all sorts of players in this. And really what we're after at Valisure is we need independent testing to essentially answer the fundamental question, is this a quality medication? And this largely follows a lot of FDA guidance and industry standards, but has the opportunity to also incorporate academic and global insights, like organizations like the World Health Organization, like decades of academic research, as in the scenario of Zantac and ranitidine. And I think it's just a really important component that we're doing as much as we can to better integrate into the larger healthcare ecosystem, and will hopefully be successful. And just to close out that, we really see this as it's a minor adjustment, but a major improvement. We're just inserting this concept of independent chemical testing before it gets to the final users or pharmacies or wholesalers or healthcare systems, and just making sure that we have an independent look on these products. And on the occasion that there are issues, identify them and make sure they come out of the system, and giving that transparency and quality assurance into the healthcare system is what we're all about. So with that, happy to chat about any of those points, and thanks again for the opportunity to speak to everybody today.
No, thank you as well, David. I mean, very eye-opening, very eye-opening. And I think that for a lot of people who are here tonight, also very sobering, things that people think they can, just assume, that's easy to take for granted, the safety of the pharma supply in this particular case, and realizing that there are some of these gaps, and some of the confidence that comes with knowing that the Valisures of the world are out there, serving the role that Valisure does, given, everything that you laid out about some of the checks and balances that could work a bit better. To put it mildly. We've gotten a lot of great questions so far, and we'll try to kick things off with them. And for everyone who's on the call, if you have additional questions, please feel free to just add them to the chat, and we'll get through as many of them as we can live tonight. Any that we don't get to, we'll do our best to get to offline. But our first question in terms of these checks and balances comes from Rob, basically asking about the good manufacturing practices standards, the GMP standards. Basically, the question there is, what is it about that standards regime that makes it possible for some of these issues to sneak on by?
That's a great question, and there's really a couple answers to that. So first of all, not everybody that has an FDA-approved facility is supposed to adhere to GMP, good manufacturing practices, which is a whole quality management system. Now, not everybody does, right? So just because they say they do, and this is really a pharmaceutical industry system that's based on self-reporting. So there are occasional inspections, but again, especially if they're overseas, those are announced 2 or 3 months ahead of time. And just because you're inspected even a couple, once every 2 years, which is generally what happens in the United States, it doesn't mean that everything was done perfectly, and then there aren't ways to get around an inspection. That's And the Bottle of Lies, I think, is a great book that goes into a lot of details around that, specifically what happened with Ranbaxy and the effects all around those potential fraud that can happen. So I think even from that perspective, there's a lot that regulatory-wise could be done better. I mean, just don't give 2 months of heads up before you go and inspect a facility. Is pretty obvious to me anyway. But the other component is that even the GMP process itself is very much based on deferring to the manufacturers to even register what tests they should be testing. And actually the way that the current industry and regulatory system works is that, for example, something like dissolution, we looked at some of those slides. How are we supposed to test for dissolution, a pill actually coming apart? Well, the methodology, how you're actually testing, like what solution you put into a beaker and have a paddle that spins around and watch the tablet dissolve and take samples to see how quickly the active pharmaceutical ingredient is getting into that beaker, essentially how you test for dissolution. Those conditions are set by the manufacturers themselves. And they're registered as a USP monograph that they pay for, and then becomes the GMP. So I don't think that's an entirely unbiased system. And I think there's many examples of situations where you have a USB monograph that, whether nefariously or not, or just by convenience, has a system that are things like water. Put some water in a beaker and then put the tablet in it and spin it and see and have it dissolve. And we can argue all day about in vitro analysis and trying to be as close to a human stomach as possible. But believe me when I tell you that a human stomach is not water. It's about 1 million times more acidic at resting pH, and I think inappropriate to test a tablet that you're going to be swallowing in pure water. Not to mention, there's some of these monographs that have high pHs and enough ionic surfactant to kill 5 rats are put into that solution, and the pill dissolves, but so is your hand if you put it in there. So one of the things that we do at Valisure is we test in physiologically relevant simulated gastric fluid, which does not always follow the GMP, does not always follow the USP monograph, but I think is, again, you don't have to be a PhD chemist or molecular biologist to realize that obviously we should be testing products in physiologically relevant conditions. And so that's one of the things that we do at Valisure. So I think there's a number of really kind of getting more and more into the weeds details of the limitations of GMP. I think it's a reasonable system of quality management, but has gaps and has cracks. And by the way, Valisure is purposely not a GMP facility. We are not a GMP registered laboratory. We don't work for pharma companies to do their GMP testing. So what GMP laboratories often do will be release testing or stability testing for manufacturers in order to do the GMP component of the regulatory process to submit to the FDA. We don't do that. We are ISO accredited. So ISO is the International Organization for Standardization, which is, in my opinion, an even broader accreditation system, and accredits us as a whole organization, and also accredits the specific tests that we run for robustness and consistency and accuracy and precision. But we do that to specifically delineate that we're not part of GMP. So I think GMP does do a reasonable job most of the time. But there's a lot of gaps, and I think what we do as an ISO facility and as independent testers is try and fill in those gaps, and really think that that's the key missing piece of this whole infrastructure is independent testing, is ISO in addition to GMP. And maybe a longer answer to that question than we were looking for, but is really good question that really gets to the meat of a lot of why we exist.
No, definitely. And basically it comes down to sort of that rigor of the testing, to what you were mentioning earlier, as one part, and then the other part is the difference between truly independent testing compared to testing where it's either self-done or self-sponsored in some way, shape, or form, to what you were just mentioning as well.
And often both.
Yes. Yeah, exactly, as you were mentioning as well. And which actually brings us to the next question, which we have from Suzanne, which is, this kind of independent testing that the Valisures of the world do, wonderful and all. In fact, she admits that when she read the article about you and Valisure on Washington Post, she actually changed her prescription immediately to Valisure, she says. So you have apparently a customer here with us tonight. But she's wondering, how can you do all of this without charging a premium, given that this independent testing and the rigor of it, must take a lot of effort on behalf of you and your team?
No, it's a great question. And the reality is that this isn't easy science to do. It takes a lot of investment to build it out, to build out the laboratory, to even build out, the analytical platforms and analyses for individual products themselves. That's what we spent a lot of the beginning of Valisure doing, is trying to develop some core technology that can do that in a faster, more efficient, and honestly broader way, in a way that's much more interchangeable, so we can run these kinds of analyses in many different kinds of products interchangeably within a day. Run dozens of different kind of drug products that we need to do to have thousands that are available through our pharmacy. So that does help on the cost side, but even higher level than that, this isn't that expensive or that difficult to do, especially when you're doing it on a large batch perspective. If we had to test every single pill of every single bottle, first of all, you never get any pills because they're destructive tests. It destroys the pill when you analyze it. But when we do this, even when we buy 10,000 or a few tens of thousands of tablets in our pharmacy system, and we tend to buy for months at a time, so we can buy a large batch, we're adding maybe a penny a pill of cost. So that extra 30 cents that it might cost us when we do this for your prescription, we just take on as part of the value add margin. You have all these online pharmacies these days that have all this specialty packaging or really fast delivery services, and these are great services, but they also cost a lot of money, and so they're spending their value add on a convenience factor and a marketing factor, whereas we're spending it on independent analysis and testing and quality assurance. And it's honestly something that's that much more scalable. It's a model that works even on the pharmacy side, or buying 10,000 tablets at a time. And just imagine, as we do it for manufacturers, they're making 1 million at a time. We're talking about really fractions of a penny per pill, and much costs that should not affect the consumer to be able to do this. So it's not an impossible lift, and it absolutely can be done. And that was really a big focus of Valisure, is the proof of principle that you can do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, that probably makes it all the more striking, frankly, that it was something that really was not done too extensively in sort of a pre-Valisure world. And, pretty incredible to just think about what those economies of scale are in the way in which Valisure does its work. The next question that we have comes from Stephen, who wanted to kind of go back to what you were talking about, NDMA. And his question is, do you also find NDMA in, and I hope I'm pronouncing these correctly, telmisartan, losartan, and irbesartan?
Yeah, so we did look at some of the other sartans, and it has not been identified. We didn't find any in telmisartan. Losartan has had a variety of problems with actually other nitrosamine compounds. The FDA actually allowed a 10 times higher level of particular nitrosamine due to so many issues with losartan that they said would only exist for 6 months, and I think it's been 1.5 years. But we do test for other nitrosamine. So, obviously a lot of focus on NDMA specifically, but we test for a whole suite of nitrosamine compounds, including an MBA, which is the specific one that losartan's had issues with. And we have found it in losartan and all over the place. It's really, again, kind of an underscoring of, there's some manufacturers that have this much, some that have this much, some that we can't detect any. So, they're in the recent guidance, or the 1.5 year old guidance, they all passed because the bar got raised. But we do as much as we can on the pharmacy side to survey it and try and find the ones that have the least amount of these issues, or no detectable levels of these issues. And that's what we try to have in our own pharmacies. So we do test all of the products that go through our pharmacy, and a lot of what you just mentioned are high volume generic drug products, and we have tested them all. And yeah, irbesartan, I believe, is another one on the list, and has had some issues itself. We have tested those as well. And by the way, actually, all those that you mentioned, other than telmisartan, were also tested by the FDA. Actually, every drug compound that I mentioned, the FDA does a few dozen on-market drug product tests a year that they publish. That's generally what we do in a day. But every one of these drug compounds, losartan, valsartan, irbesartan, Also, ranitidine and nizatidine, which is very similar to ranitidine, and metformin have all been tested by the FDA dozens of times, and every one of those tests passed. So again, that kind of also underscores that part of independent testing is not just the testing itself. Obviously, FDA and Valisure are all testing for NDMA and using very similar technologies and methodologies, but it's also an independent sourcing. And the FDA will request a voluntary sample to be sent to them, which again is not the most unbiased way to receive a sample, whereas we're taking it directly off the shelf from wholesalers and from our own pharmacy distribution system. Sometimes you find differences between that sampling and the kind of sampling that we do, and there's actually a lot more information on that from metformin. So again, maybe a long answer, but it's a good question, and a lot of different drug products really need this kind of vigilance.
Absolutely, definitely. And I mean, in particular, very striking that these are things that the FDA has been plugged into as well, which brings us to the next question that we have. And we have time, by the way, for it looks like probably a couple more questions. And once again, we'll provide you the questions that folks have asked tonight, even if we don't get a chance to get to all of them. But the next question, speaking of the FDA, is, why does it take the FDA so long to act? In particular, when either its own analysis or when the analysis of organizations like Valisure come to the table, and you were mentioning earlier on the speed at which other countries were acting in response to some of what these findings were, and then there was the speed of the FDA. What causes that? Politics, understaffing, something else? And this question comes to us from Suzanne.
Great question for the FDA. I don't know. It has been disappointing to see how long it takes sometimes. I've been personally disappointed with the sometimes combative nature the FDA has had with us specifically. I feel like we're all on the same page, right? We're all trying to get the best possible quality drug products to American patients. We had this whole fight with the FDA through the press, which seems like a very inefficient way to have a scientific discussion to me, about testing of ranitidine. And we kept harping on the fact that we think it's a fundamental problem with the drug, and that it could form NDMA in the human stomach, which is not just us. You have literally decades of scientific research that shows that. And the FDA came out with a comment that we tested, and there's no NDMA that forms in the stomach, with no data, with no anything, no conditions. Just it doesn't happen. That we tested in simulated gastric fluids, what they said, which is actually a specific, a very simple formula of a solution, which doesn't have any nitrogen source, which any stomach does. There's no nitrite in it. Your food always has nitrite. Your stomach always has nitrite in it. And we not only published our analysis in our own citizen petition. It took over a year till it finally happened, but the Journal of the American Medical Association published our study also with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center about these conditions. So we're being very transparent here. How much nitrite gets used and how the reaction conditions are done, and again, just building off of decades of research and what the World Health Organization specifically prescribed as research conditions for this kind of research in 1978. But the FDA comes out with a statement and says, no, it doesn't happen. So it's very frustrating that happens. I wish they would at least publish their conditions or some science behind a statement like that. And don't know why that is. From our perspective, we're happy to work with the FDA, with any industry or regulatory body that wants to work on these issues. And I think part of that is admitting there are real issues. We don't have a perfect system. No system's perfect. There's always going to be some cracks or some problems that we can hopefully try and help address together. Whether or not it's part of a regulatory framework, which may someday happen. Right now, as part of private industry, we're taking the lead, I think, in pushing this into the industry and the healthcare ecosystem, and hopefully one day that will include the FDA and regulatory systems all around the world.
Absolutely. And we'll ask one more question for this evening, and then the others we will do our best to share with you by email. So hopefully you can follow up on them there. But speaking of Valisure leading the charge in this way, our question from Marie asks, does someone certify your methodology of analysis and certification? Basically,
Sure.
what's the check and balance on Valisure?
Yeah, no, that's great question. And an important one. And by the way, one that we take seriously. When Adam and I were first kind of contemplating this whole system of Valisure, and hey, we should develop some analytical techniques to help address this. Our first call in any new venture is always lawyers, for better or worse. And the second call in this case was to the FDA, saying, hey, we really want to develop some methodologies and we want to do this right. What guidance do you have? What do we need to register with you to do these analyses on human drug products? We want to go to you first, FDA. And basically the response was, well, wait, are you manufacturing? Are you part of the process? Like, no, we want this to be an additional layer after manufacturing. And I said, oh, well, if it's after manufacturing, it's not under FDA purview whatsoever. Kind of go and do whatever you want. And we were uncomfortable with that. We said, well, wait a minute, just because, we could generate our own certificate just because we're a laboratory and our laboratories to do things like that. We're not comfortable with that ourselves. And so that's why we went to ISO. So that's really what ISO is for. So International Organization for Standardization. We're accredited to ISO 17025. That's the specific designation for analytical laboratories. And that's really the straightforward answer to that question is we are voluntarily registered and accredited, and we have audits every year. This year they didn't physically send an auditor, but we had a Zoom audit around all of our methodologies, how we do them. It's an accreditation not just for us as an organization and how we deal with data, how we work our analytical systems, but it's an accreditation all the way down to the specific analyses that we perform and what ranges and robustness of the accuracy of those analytics. And you could look up our certificate. It's an ISO certificate that outlines who's accrediting us, who of the accrediting bodies is specifically making sure that we're adhering to ISO 17025. You can contact them specifically. There's all sorts of forms. So the point is there are layers and layers that we're voluntarily doing. There's not a regulatory reason that we have to do that, but we feel that it's very important to be able to answer that question. If we're out there saying, hey, you need independent analysis and more oversight, well, who's overseeing you? So that's what ISO is there for, and we are proud to be a part of that.
It's all about letting there be a spotlight on the ecosystem. And with that, David, thank you for letting us shine the spotlight on you and Valisure tonight. Thank you as well to my fellow board member, Jeff Feldman, on the A2A YAA Board of Governors Committee, and also Steve Bloom of the YAA, the Careers, Life, and Yale Initiative over there. Two quick housekeeping items before we wrap things up for this evening. First of all, this event has been brought to you as part of the Careers, Life, and Yale Thursdays must-see Yale 8 p.m. event series. We have events like this every Thursday at 8 p.m. So check out some of the others that we have coming up. And the other thing, as mentioned at the onset, if you are not yet already a member of Cross Campus, the Yale Alumni Social Network, we encourage you to sign up. It's crosscampus.yale.edu, a great place to go and meet and socialize with your fellow Yale alumni. So once again, thank you, David, for joining this evening, and thank you to all of you for joining us as well. And
yeah, thank you very much. And to that point, my email is also up there. Anybody wants other questions or be in touch, we are here at Yale Science Park in New Haven. And thanks again for the opportunity to speak today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you as well, David. And we'll be sharing the remaining questions with you as well.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone. Take care.